Denali stands at 20,310 feet, or 6,190 meters. After starting the expedition, it became clear that one of my clients was really going to struggle with the physical exertion of summiting such a high peak. He was always the last one to make it into camp, and he could not carry his fair share of the supplies, so we had to divvy some of these things out amongst the 3 guides. Within 3 or 4 days into the climb, I decided to have my experienced assistants lead the group forward so I could tie in with this client and give him the best chance of success. Even then, I still made a plan for one of my assistants to take him back to the base of the mountain, just in case. Once I tied in with our struggling climber, I got to know him really well. He was a determined person, and despite the physical strain, after 13 days, he made it all the way to the high camp of the mountain, which was at 17,200 feet. After camping a couple of days near the top, we had some very good weather and decided this was going to be the day we would attempt the summit. About 2 hours into the attempt, we were moving through what's called Denali Pass at an elevation of 18,000 feet. A few hours later, we came to a rock outcrop called Archdeacon's Tower. On the opposite side of Archdeacon's Tower, a climber can see the summit of Denali. And when most clients make it this far, they get excited because it's almost a guarantee they're about to have a successful expedition. But my one climbing partner was having a harder and harder time as we gained the altitude. The route past Archdeacon's Tower exposes 3 obstacles before reaching the top. The first obstacle is a snowfield. We call it the football field. It's relatively flat, but when you're at an altitude of 19,500 feet and breathing is very difficult, even the length of a football field is quite a challenge. Now, just after the football field is a 500-foot rise called Pig Hill. In some places, the hill climbs at a 40-degree angle. It's Denali's last steep vertical gain, and it's brutal. When you make it to the top of Pig Hill, you'll find yourself on the summit ridge. By following this gradual uphill rise up for about 300 feet, you will eventually make your way to the summit of North America. Standing there with my struggling client, I watched his facial expression as he saw these obstacles that lay ahead. I could tell in that moment that was as far as he was going to go. He sits down in the snow and tells me he can't go any further. He is totally exhausted and afraid if he tries to use what little energy he feels he has left, he will not have enough energy to get himself back down to the high camp. Honestly, I hadn't expected him to make it even this far. But now that we were so close, I'm telling him, we have traveled for 18 days to get to this point. You're only about 800 feet from the top. But no matter what I said to him, no matter what I tried to do, he was adamant that he was done. I told the rest of my clients and guides to continue to the summit without us, and I sat down to think. In a last-ditch effort, I pulled some energy gel packets from my pack and told them to eat up. Now, energy bars and other things we take for granted today were still new back then, so I wasn't sure how effective they would be, but it was worth a try. By the time my client was done consuming the gel packets, he got up on his feet and said, "I think I can do this." In a moment of fierce energy, he stands up and encourages me to get going. We are tied together with a rope, 50 feet apart. As I start slowly stepping forward to the football field, I can hear his footsteps right behind me. I have to remind him to keep the rope between us stretched out so in case one of us falls, the other can stop his partner quickly with little slack in the rope. We move so quickly that we catch up with our team about halfway up the summit ridge, and then we're standing on the top of North America. It's beautiful, incredible. I experienced doubts about his ability to reach the top, but in that moment, I was inspired by his ability to break through even his most desperate moment and finish the journey that he had set out to make. After 3 days of climbing back down to the base of the mountain, we finished the trip by flying back out to civilization. And I thought that was that. But it turns out about a year later, I would learn the real story of this client who, despite all odds, made it to the top and changed his life and mine forever. It was almost exactly a year after that Denali expedition, I received a phone call from my client's brother. His brother was inviting me to a funeral for my client who had just passed away. That's when I found out our struggling climber had received news of a terminal illness before the expedition, but decided to go anyway. With this new information, I gained a sense of appreciation for how much work he put into that trip. Now, divvying up his supplies and watching him walk into Camp Last didn't seem like a failure. Every day he finished was a triumph. More impressive than climbing the mountain is what I learned next. I remember at the funeral, there were pictures, many of his Denali expedition. I even saw myself in some of the pictures. My client's brother gives this eulogy and tells the congregation that even though they lost their brother to cancer, an amazing thing had happened. When their brother heard of his diagnosis, the news was so devastating he gave up on life. He quit his job, called off his engagement to his fiancée, telling her, "There's no future with me." But because he had spent several years dreaming and training to summit Denali, his family encouraged him to at least fly up to Alaska and see the mountain he had always planned to climb. He took that step, and it led to the next, and you know the rest of the story. Each choice and resulting action kept him moving closer and closer to his dream until he made it, despite all the odds. But he didn't stop there. He came back from that trip a transformed person, someone with a commitment to live. He used what he had learned and experienced on Denali to restart his career and proposed again to his fiancée. They were married, and at the time of the funeral, she was 6 months pregnant with their child. Instead of fading away with sickness, he left behind a legacy. So as my client's brother finishes the eulogy, he says, "I don't know what happened on that mountain, but it gave us our brother back." That day, in that pew, I made a commitment to understand what it was that transformed this young man from being someone who gave up on life to someone who made a decision to live deliberately and thrive. Somewhere in his struggles, he found something. I never got a chance to ask him exactly what his purpose was, but I saw firsthand how much power it gave him. Since that trip, I have learned that everybody has a purpose that is completely their own. It's not always apparent, especially when we feel stuck, but there is always a way to move forward. Remember that one step at a time is always enough.